The first time I saw my own granddaughter's birthday party, it was through the cold glare of a phone screen, a garish digital slideshow posted by a woman whose name I barely recognized. The caption, peppered with heart emojis, announced Serafina's 10th birthday. There she was, my Sarah, her face beaming above a cake ablaze with candles, surrounded by a sea of smiling children. But the smile on my son Julian's face was a stranger to me, and his wife Corinne stood beside him, her hand on his arm, a portrait of familial bliss I was clearly not meant to be a part of. There was no call, no text, not even a sterile, mass-printed invitation in the mail. Just this public broadcast of my own exclusion, a silent, screaming declaration that the circle had been drawn, and I was standing on the outside. My thumb hovered over the screen, a tremor running through my hand. My heart didn't break. It hollowed, a sudden cavernous emptiness where warmth used to be. This wasn't a simple oversight. This was a statement, delivered with the brutal efficiency of the digital age. It was a meticulously crafted silence, a story being told about a family that had moved on, and in their new narrative, I was a ghost, a footnote they had collectively agreed to erase. Something cold and heavy settled in my chest, a dread that felt ancient and new all at once. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that this was not just about a forgotten invitation. It was the beginning of an unraveling, and the threads were being pulled from my hands before I even understood the pattern. I sat in the deepening shadows of my living room, the phone's light casting a ghostly pale on my face. The silence of the house pressed in, no longer comforting, but accusatory. For years I had sensed the shift, the slow, chilling drift. It was in the clipped phone calls, the visits that grew shorter and more perfunctory, the way Corinne's eyes would glaze over when I spoke of the past. It was the subtle, almost imperceptible erosion of intimacy, like a shoreline giving way to a relentless tide. You tell yourself it's nothing. You tell yourself they're busy, that life is complicated. You make excuses for the love that has grown thin, until one day you are confronted with undeniable proof that you have become an inconvenience, a relic to be stored away and ignored. This would be Serafina's 10th birthday. I remembered her first, the scent of baby powder and sugar in the air. Julian had held her up for me to see, his face filled with a kind of awe I hadn't seen since. He had called me Mom, his voice thick with emotion. Corinne had even hugged me, a genuine warm embrace, and asked for my recipe for lemon poppy seed bread. Now, all that remained of that warmth was the phantom glow of a screen. I put the phone down, but the images were burned into my mind. I didn't want to go. Pride, sharp and bitter, told me to stay away, to grant them the distance they so clearly craved. But beneath the pride was a deeper, more stubborn current. It was the memory of Serafina's small hand in mine as we searched for sea glass on the beach, the sound of her laughter as I pushed her on the swing, her sleepy weight against my shoulder as I read to her from a worn copy of The Secret Garden. I had promised her we would build a real secret garden one day at the cottage at Oakhaven. My mind snagged on the thought. Oakhaven, the small, secluded cottage by Whisperwood Lake that my husband Arthur and I had built with our own hands. It was more than a house. It was a sanctuary, a vessel of memory. And it was mine. A few days passed in a fog of quiet grief. I didn't reach out. I didn't text. What was there to say? Did you forget I exist? The question felt too pathetic to ask. Then, on the fourth morning, fueled by something other than hope, I made a decision. I wouldn't go to their sterile, picture-perfect party. I would go to Oakhaven, but first, I would prepare a gift. From the cedar chest in the attic, I retrieved the book, its green cloth cover faded and soft to the touch. I turned its pages carefully, the paper whispering under my fingers. Tucked inside was a pressed four-leaf clover we'd found together one summer. I slid a small handwritten card inside the book, my cursive steady. My dearest Sarah, may you always find your own secret gardens. I love you more than all the stars. All my love, Grandma L. I then moved to the kitchen, my hands finding their old familiar rhythm: flour, butter, sugar, lemon zest. The scent of the poppy seed bread filled the house, a ghost of happier times. I wrapped the warm loaf in parchment paper and placed it in a simple gift bag alongside the book. I packed a small overnight bag, my movements calm and deliberate. There was no storm inside me now, just a quiet, resolute calm. I was not seeking a confrontation. I was seeking clarity. I was following the thread of an unfinished story, one that belonged to me, to Arthur, to a life they were trying to write me out of. The drive to their sprawling suburban home was an exercise in detachment. The perfectly manicured lawns, the identical houses, it all felt like a stage set. I pulled up across the street, just as I'd seen in the online photos. Balloons bobbed from the mailbox. Cars lined the curb. Through the large picture window, I could see the party in full swing, a silent movie of laughter and celebration. Gathering the gift bag, I took a deep breath and crossed the street. My feet felt heavy on the pristine concrete walkway. I wasn't fighting for an invitation anymore. I was simply making a statement. I am here. I exist. You do not get to erase me. My hand was inches from the doorbell when the door swung open. It was Julian. He didn't look angry or surprised. He looked prepared. His face was a placid mask, his eyes carefully avoiding mine. He stepped onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind him until it clicked shut, a soft, final sound that sealed me out. The muffled sounds of the party died behind the heavy wood. "Mom," he began, his voice low and devoid of warmth. "This isn't a good time." He spoke as if reciting a script. He said it would be uncomfortable. He said Corinne had worked so hard. He said they didn't want any drama to upset the children. Each word was a carefully polished stone, smooth and cold, dropped between us. Then came the line he seemed to have rehearsed the most, the one he delivered while staring at the welcome mat at my feet. "You have to understand," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You're just not really a part of this anymore." He didn't say it cruelly. He said it with a kind of weary finality, as if stating a fact of nature, like the sun setting or the tide going out. I stood there holding the gift for his daughter, my arms suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. The warm scent of the lemon bread seemed to mock me. I looked at my son, this man I had raised, and saw a stranger. The boy who had cried on my shoulder after his first heartbreak was gone, replaced by this man who could close a door on his own mother and feel nothing but the mild inconvenience of a task completed. I held out the gift bag. "This is for Serafina," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. He took it without meeting my eyes, his fingers brushing mine for a fleeting, electric moment. It felt like touching a statue. He mumbled a thank you, turned, and disappeared back inside, the door clicking shut once more. I walked back to my car, the silence in my ears roaring. It wasn't sadness that filled me, not yet. It was a profound and chilling clarity. The door he had closed wasn't just to his house. It was to a part of my life, a version of myself that had been defined by him, by them. That version was now dead. When I got home, the house felt cavernous. The lingering scent of lemon and sugar was suffocating. Just as dusk bled across the sky, my phone buzzed. A text from Corinne. "Julian told me you came by. Please don't make this difficult for everyone." Not an apology, not a question, a command disguised as a plea. I didn't reply. I walked to the old roll-top desk in the study, the one that had been Arthur's. From a locked drawer, I pulled a heavy folder. Inside, nestled among old letters and photographs, was the deed to the Oakhaven cottage. I ran my thumb over the embossed seal. My name, Eleanora Vance, typed in crisp black ink. Sole owner. Julian had always spoken of the cottage as if it were already his inheritance. He'd talk of the renovations he planned, the dock he would build, the long summer weekends he and Corinne would spend there. He had assumed, they had both assumed, I had allowed their assumptions to fester, telling myself my silence was a form of generosity, giving him space to dream. Now I saw it for what it was, a weakness they had exploited. Corinne's text wasn't a plea to stop making things difficult. It was a warning shot, an attempt to ensure my continued silence. Instead, it ignited a fuse. If they were so comfortable building a future that excluded me, they were about to discover that future was built on land that did not belong to them. The next morning, I woke before the dawn. The sky was a soft, pearly gray. The world held in a moment of quiet suspension. With the cottage deed lying on the kitchen table beside my coffee, my mind drifted back, not to Julian's entitlement, but to Arthur. To the splinters we'd pulled from our hands while laying the floorboards, the taste of cheap wine we'd shared on the bare mattress of our first night there, the way his hand felt in mine as we watched the sun set over Whisperwood Lake. After Arthur's funeral, Julian, then a brooding 19-year-old, had come with me to the cottage. He hadn't said much, but the next morning I found a perfectly stacked pile of firewood by the hearth, a small, silent act of love and grief. Years later, when he'd first mentioned taking over the cottage, I'd deflected, saying something vague about it being a place for all of us. He never asked again. He just started acting as if it were his. I saw now how my desire to avoid conflict had enabled his sense of ownership. But the cottage wasn't just property. It was the last tangible piece of my life with Arthur. It was memory and loss and love, layered into wood and stone. Just as I was lost in these thoughts, my doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was my oldest friend, Beatrice. Bea and I had been nurses together for 30 years, sharing secrets and sorrows over countless cups of lukewarm coffee in hospital break rooms. She held a bag of pastries and wore an expression that said she already knew. "Don't tell me," she said, marching past me and into the kitchen. "I saw it on Facebook. Sheila from accounting's niece is married to Corinne's cousin. The whole world saw that party except you." She set the pastries on the counter and poured herself a coffee as if she owned the place. "They didn't let you in, did they?" I just shook my head. Bea sat across from me, her gaze sharp and knowing. "Ellie, you know what this is. When they want to cut you out, they start by making you feel crazy. Then they start on the paperwork." She leaned forward. "Did you ever sign that cottage over to him?" Wordlessly, I slid the deed across the table. She scanned it, her lips tightening into a thin line. "Good. It's still yours. Clean title." She looked at me, her eyes hard with a protective fire. "Listen to me. This isn't just a family squabble. This is about erasure. They think because you're quiet, you're weak. They're counting on you to fade away gracefully." She pulled a business card from her purse and pushed it toward me. "Isabel Rossi, estate law. She's a shark with manners. Call her. Not to start a war, but to know where your borders are. It's time you reminded them." Bea's visit was like a splash of cold water. It wasn't just comfort. It was a call to action. I had been a ghost in my own life for too long. Perhaps it was time I started rattling some chains. 2 days later, I was sitting in Isabel Rossi's impeccably organized downtown office. She was younger than I expected, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that I found instantly reassuring. Bea had already sent her the details. Miss Rossi didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mrs. Vance," she began, her voice calm and direct. Your son, Julian, has listed the Oakhaven property as a primary collateral asset to secure a 7-figure venture capital loan for his new tech startup. The air left my lungs. It was worse than I imagined. He wasn't just assuming, he was actively committing fraud. He has presented it to his investors as an uncontested inheritance, she continued, tapping her pen on a highlighted document on her screen. Our preliminary research shows he's in the final stages of closing the funding round. If they proceed, and his venture fails, the lenders could place a lien on your property and force a sale. I stared at the window, at the gray city buildings. I never signed anything, I whispered. That place. My husband built it. It was ours. Then you have complete legal authority, Mrs. Rossi said, her tone softening slightly. We need to put his investors and their banks on formal notice. We'll file a notice of claim and a lis pendens on the property. It's a legal document that clouds the title, making it impossible for him to use it as collateral. It will halt the loan process immediately. I will handle all communications. You will not have to speak to him or his wife at all. She slid the papers across the polished desk. I picked up the pen. My hand was perfectly still. As I signed my name, Eleanora Vance, I felt a profound shift inside me. It wasn't anger or revenge. It was the feeling of a spine straightening, of a voice, long silent, finding its pitch. This cottage was the last fortress of my identity, a place where I was not Julian's mother or Sarah's grandmother, but simply Eleanora, and it was not for sale. Just so you are aware, Ms. Rossi said as she walked me to the door, this will likely cause a significant reaction. Good, I said, feeling a strength I hadn't known in years. Let it. The notice was filed on a Tuesday. By Thursday, my phone was a blinking, buzzing hive of ignored calls and unread messages from Julian and Corinne. Their tone shifted from feigned concern to outright panic. I deleted them all without listening. Instead, I packed a bag and with B riding shotgun, drove to Oakhaven. The moment we arrived, breathing in the scent of pine and damp earth, I felt a sense of homecoming that was almost painful in its intensity. We aired the place out, swept the floors, and built a fire in the old stone hearth. We worked in comfortable silence, the way old friends do. While dusting, I found a box of photos Julian had packed away years ago. I opened it, and there they were. Arthur holding a tiny Julian on his shoulders, me with flour on my apron, the three of us in a tangle of arms and smiles. I pulled out a single photo of Arthur and me, standing on the unfinished porch, his arm wrapped tightly around me. I put it on the mantel. That one would stay. That evening, a text from Julian finally broke through my wall of silence. I saw the legal filing. You're destroying my career. This will ruin me. I read the words, and for the first time felt a flicker of pity, not for his situation, but for the man he had become. I turned off my phone and placed it in a drawer. Out on the porch, wrapped in an old quilt, Bea and I watched the stars emerge over the lake. You drew a line, she said quietly. I did, I replied, feeling not guilt, but a profound sense of peace. I finally did. On Saturday morning, a sleek silver sedan crunched up the gravel driveway. A man in a suit that looked out of place in the woods stepped out. He was all polished shoes and brisk efficiency. Mrs. Vance, he said, not offering a hand. Matthew Klein. I represent your son and his wife. I led him into the living room where Bea sat pointedly reading a book. He declined coffee and got straight to the point. My clients wish to resolve this matter discreetly, he said, his voice smooth as silk. They are prepared to make a significant financial offer for you to sign over the title. It is, we believe, in everyone's best interest. He slid a thick folder across the coffee table. I didn't touch it. I stood, walked to the mantel, and returned with the deed. I laid it on the table and pointed to my signature. Mr. Klein, I said, my voice clear and steady. This is not a piece of real estate. This is the last place my husband and I built something together. It holds the memory of his hands and the sound of my son's childhood laughter. Some things do not have a price. He stared at me for a long moment, his professional veneer cracking just a little. He packed his briefcase and stood. This is having a serious impact on your son's financial future, he said, a last, veiled threat. Then perhaps he should have thought of that, I said, before he decided I no longer had a future in his family. After he left, I took his unopened folder out to the fire pit. Page by page, I fed the buyout offer to the flames, watching the words curl into black ash and float away on the wind. The next afternoon, as I was stacking firewood, I heard a small sound at the gate. I turned to see a small figure standing there, her hair in a messy ponytail, her shoes muddy. It was Serafina. She ran to me, her arms wrapping around my waist in a fierce, desperate hug that spoke of things she didn't have the words for. I held her, my heart aching with a mix of joy and sorrow. "How did you get here, sweet girl?" I whispered into her hair. She pulled back, her eyes wide and serious. "Mommy's friend drove me to the library in town. I walked from there." I remembered the way. She looked around the cabin, her gaze lingering on the stone fireplace. "Daddy never talks about you," she said, her voice small. "I found your picture in a box, the one of you holding me. Mommy said she was going to throw it out, so I took it." My heart constricted. We spent the afternoon together. We didn't talk about the fight, about the closed doors or the cruel silences. We baked cookies. We walked to the creek and skipped stones. We sat on the bench Arthur had built, and she told me about school and her friends. "It's quiet here," she said, leaning her head against my shoulder. "I like that. Nobody talks over me." As the sun began to set, I called a trusted local car service to take her home. I wrapped a hand-knitted scarf around her neck. "I'm coming back," she whispered at the gate. "I want to learn how to make the cookies by myself." I watched the car's taillights disappear into the trees. Back inside, the warmth of the cabin felt different. It was no longer just a place of memory. It was a place where new ones could be made. I hadn't just been holding on to the past. I had been preserving it for the future. The following week, the final papers were drawn up by Miss Rossi. It wasn't a transfer to Julian. It wasn't a sale. I sat at Arthur's old desk and signed the deed, my hand steady. My name was replaced not by another individual, but by an organization, the Oak Haven Trust. The morning sun was stretching over the valley when the new sign was mounted at the gate. The cottage was no longer mine, but it belonged to something far greater. I had donated the property in its entirety to a non-profit dedicated to providing sanctuary retreats for women who were grieving, healing, or simply seeking to find themselves again. A local news crew came to cover the story of the donation. They asked for a photo. I stood before the hearth, my back straight, my hand resting on the mantel next to the picture of Arthur and me. In that moment, I understood. My legacy was not a son who had forgotten me or a piece of land to be passed down. My legacy was this act of transformation, turning a place of personal memory into a sanctuary for collective healing. As I watched the first group of women arrive, their faces etched with weariness, but also with a glimmer of hope, I felt no sense of loss. Some stories don't end. They are rewritten. They echo forward into other lives. My story, Arthur's story, would now be a part of theirs. For anyone who has ever felt invisible, pushed to the margins of a life you helped build, know this: your story is not over. You still hold the pen. True strength isn't about holding on. It's about choosing what to build, what to preserve, and what to give away. It's about drawing your own name back into the world, not with anger, but with purpose. And sometimes, the most powerful way to reclaim your home is to open its doors to others.